The dust from the stagecoach had barely settled when Cassandra Blackwood realized something was terribly wrong. The sprawling ranch before her looked nothing like the photograph her fiancé had sent. Her stomach knotted as the driver tossed her trunk to the ground and tipped his hat. "Welcome to Whispering Pines Ranch, madam," he announced with a grin before climbing back onto his perch. "Wait," Cassandra called out, her voice quivering. "This can't be right. I'm meant to be delivered to Oakwood Ranch. Thomas Oakwood's place." The driver's face fell. "Oakwood Ranch? That's another 30 miles west, madam. Won't make it before nightfall, and there's word of bandits on that stretch." He gestured to the darkening sky. "Storm's coming too." Cassandra clutched her reticule tighter, heart pounding against her corset. After traveling for weeks from Boston to Colorado Territory in 1875, the last thing she expected was to be deposited at the wrong destination. "Can't you take me tomorrow then?" she pleaded. "Got a schedule to keep, madam. Back through here in a week." With a flick of his wrist, the driver snapped the reins, and the stagecoach lurched forward, leaving Cassandra alone with her trunk, the approaching storm, and the strange ranch house looming before her. A gust of wind whipped at her skirts as she stood frozen in place. The long journey had been difficult enough leaving behind her family after her father's business collapse, agreeing to marry a man she'd only corresponded with through letters. Now this. Thunder rumbled in the distance as the ranch house door swung open. A tall figure emerged, silhouetted against the warm light spilling from inside. He approached with long, purposeful strides, and as he drew closer, Cassandra could make out his features. Rugged, sun-bronzed skin, dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and eyes the color of a summer storm. "Can I help you, miss?" His voice was deep, tinged with curiosity. "I believe there's been a terrible mistake," Cassandra explained, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm supposed to be at Oakwood Ranch. I'm to be married to Thomas Oakwood." The man's expression shifted, a mixture of surprise and something else Cassandra couldn't quite place. He glanced at the receding stagecoach, then at the thunderclouds rolling in, before his eyes settled back on her. "I'm Jackson Winters," he said, tipping his hat. "And you're about 30 miles from where you ought to be." He looked up at the darkening sky again. "But you won't be getting there tonight." As if to emphasize his point, lightning cracked across the sky, followed immediately by a crash of thunder that made Cassandra jump. Jackson's eyes softened as he took in her frightened expression. "Maybe God sent you here," he whispered, almost to himself. Then louder, "at least for tonight. You're welcome to stay until we can get you to Oakwood's place tomorrow." Rain began to fall, fat drops speckling the dust at their feet. Without waiting for her response, Jackson lifted her trunk with ease and nodded toward the house. "Come on, before we both get soaked." Cassandra hesitated only a moment before following. What choice did she have? The interior of the ranch house was simple but comfortable. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the wooden floors and hand-crafted furniture. The aroma of something savory filled the air, making Cassandra suddenly aware of how long it had been since she'd eaten. "Jackson? Who's our guest?" A silver-haired woman emerged from what appeared to be the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. "This is—" "I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name," Jackson said, turning to Cassandra. "Cassandra Blackwood," she supplied, giving a small curtsy out of habit. "Miss Blackwood was meant for Oakwood Ranch," Jackson explained. "Stagecoach dropped her here by mistake." The older woman's eyes widened. "You're Thomas Oakwood's mail-order bride? Oh, my dear." She exchanged a meaningful glance with Jackson that made Cassandra's unease grow. "I'm Martha, Jackson's housekeeper," the woman continued, approaching to take Cassandra's damp cloak. "You poor thing must be exhausted and hungry. Come, sit by the fire while I fix you a plate." Cassandra allowed herself to be led to a comfortable chair near the hearth. "Thank you for your kindness, but I don't wish to impose. If there's any way to reach Mr. Oakwood tonight. No way to get word to him in this storm. Jackson interrupted, setting her trunk down. Telegraph lines go down in weather like this, and the road will be mud by now. Martha nodded in agreement. You'll stay the night, and Jackson will take you to Oakwood Ranch tomorrow. That's that. There was a finality to her tone that Cassandra didn't dare argue with. She watched as Jackson moved to stoke the fire, his movements efficient and practiced. Unlike the gentleman she knew in Boston, everything about him spoke of a life lived outdoors, of hard work and self-reliance. How long have you been corresponding with Thomas? Jackson asked suddenly, his back still to her as he arranged the logs. About 6 months, Cassandra answered. My father's business failed last winter. When he passed away in March, he left substantial debts. Mr. Oakwood's advertisement seemed providential. Jackson turned to face her, his expression unreadable. And you've never met him? No, but his letters were kind and his proposition honorable. He needs a wife to help run his household, and I need. She trailed off, suddenly embarrassed by her circumstances. A new start, Jackson finished for her. Yes. Cassandra smoothed her skirts, avoiding his gaze. He sent a photograph. He seems quite distinguished. Something flickered across Jackson's face. Was it amusement? Before she could analyze it further, Martha returned with a steaming plate of stew and freshly baked bread. Eat up, dear. You look like you could use a good meal. The food was simple but delicious, and Cassandra realized she was famished. As she ate, Jackson settled into a chair across from her, nursing a cup of coffee. So, Miss Blackwood, what do you know about ranching life? He asked. Cassandra dabbed at her lips with a napkin. I've read several books on the subject, she replied primly. I understand it can be challenging, but I'm not afraid of hard work. A smile tugged at the corner of Jackson's mouth. Books, huh? Well, they might tell you about cattle breeds and crop rotation, but they don't prepare you for the isolation, the harsh winters, or the droughts that can wipe out everything you've worked for. Jackson, Martha scolded, don't frighten the girl. She should know what she's getting into, he countered, but his tone softened. The West isn't kind to those who come unprepared. I may be from the East, Mr. Winters, but I'm not made of porcelain, Cassandra replied, a hint of steel in her voice. My father's failure taught me that comfort and security can vanish overnight. I'm here because I choose to face whatever challenges come my way, not because I expect an easy life. Jackson studied her for a long moment, then nodded, a newfound respect in his eyes. Fair enough, Miss Blackwood. The evening progressed, with Martha sharing stories of life at Whispering Pines Ranch. Jackson had inherited it from his uncle 5 years ago and had transformed it from a struggling operation into one of the most successful in the territory. He rarely joined the conversation, content to listen and occasionally stoke the fire as the storm raged outside. When Cassandra found herself stifling yawns, Martha showed her to a small but clean bedroom off the main living area. Rest well, dear. Tomorrow will sort itself out, the older woman assured her before closing the door. Alone at last, Cassandra sank onto the edge of the bed, allowing her carefully maintained composure to crumble. What if Thomas Oakwood thought she'd intentionally delayed her arrival? What if he refused to marry her after all? She had no money to return east, nowhere else to go. Through the thin walls, she could hear Jackson and Martha speaking in hushed tones. You should have told her, Martha was saying. And say what exactly? Jackson's voice was tense. It's not my place. She deserves to know what kind of man she's marrying. She'll find out soon enough. Their voices dropped lower, and Cassandra could no longer make out the words. She lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, a sense of foreboding settling over her like a heavy blanket. What weren't they telling her about Thomas Oakwood? Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by dreams of stagecoaches careening off cliffs and faceless men waiting at altars. When dawn broke, the storm had passed, leaving behind a washed-clean world gleaming in the early morning light. Cassandra dressed carefully in one of her better traveling outfits, a deep blue skirt and matching jacket over a crisp white blouse. Today she would finally meet her future husband, and despite the unsettling conversation she'd overheard, she was determined to make a good impression. She found Jackson in the kitchen, drinking coffee while studying a map spread across the table. He looked up as she entered, and for a brief moment, something like regret flashed across his features. "Good morning, Miss Blackwood. Did you sleep well?" "As well as could be expected, thank you," she replied, accepting the cup of coffee Martha offered her. "I've marked out the route to Oakwood Ranch," Jackson said, gesturing to the map. "We'll take the wagon. It's slower than horseback, but more comfortable for you and your trunk." "I appreciate your trouble, Mr. Winters," Cassandra said formally, trying to regain some professional distance after the unexpected intimacy of being a guest in his home. Jackson folded the map and tucked it into his pocket. "No trouble. I need to head that way anyhow. Got some business with a neighboring ranch." After a hearty breakfast, during which Martha fussed over Cassandra like a mother hen, Jackson loaded her trunk into the back of a sturdy wagon. The morning was clear and cool, perfect for traveling. "Take care, dear," Martha said, embracing Cassandra. "Remember, you always have friends at Whispering Pines, should you need them." There was something in her tone, a hidden meaning that made Cassandra's stomach tighten with apprehension. She thanked the older woman sincerely, then allowed Jackson to help her onto the wagon seat. As they pulled away from the ranch, Cassandra couldn't help looking back at the modest house that had offered her shelter. Something about Whispering Pines had felt right, comfortable in a way she hadn't expected. The journey began in silence, with Jackson focused on guiding the horses along the rutted trail. The landscape was breathtaking, rolling hills giving way to dramatic mesas, the vast skies stretching endlessly above them. It was nothing like the crowded streets of Boston, and Cassandra found herself drinking in the wild beauty of it. "It's magnificent, isn't it?" she finally said, unable to contain her awe. Jackson glanced at her, a smile softening his features. "It gets in your blood. I can't imagine living anywhere else now." "How long have you been in Colorado territory?" "Came out with my uncle when I was 16, right after the war. Worked as a ranch hand until he passed. Been running Whispering Pines on my own for 5 years now." "You've done well for yourself," Cassandra observed. Jackson shrugged. "It's honest work. The land gives back what you put into it." They fell into surprisingly easy conversation as the wagon rumbled westward. Jackson pointed out landmarks and shared stories of local history. He had a dry wit that occasionally caught Cassandra off guard, making her laugh in a way she hadn't in months. Around midday, they stopped by a clear stream to rest the horses and eat the lunch Martha had packed for them. Sitting on a sun-warmed rock, Cassandra watched Jackson check the horses' harnesses. There was something compelling about his quiet confidence, his ease in this rugged environment. "Can I ask you something, Mr. Winters?" she ventured. "Jackson," he corrected. "And yes, you can ask." "Last night, I overheard you and Martha talking about Mr. Oakwood. Is there something I should know about my fiancé?" Jackson's hand stilled. He straightened and turned to face her, his expression troubled. "It's not my place to, please," Cassandra interrupted. "I'm traveling to marry a man I've never met. If you know something that might affect my decision, I believe I have a right to hear it." He studied her for a long moment, then sighed, removing his hat and running a hand through his dark hair. "Thomas Oakwood is 28 years older than the age he likely gave you in his letters. He's been widowed 3 times. Cassandra felt the blood drain from her face. 3 times? How is that possible? His first wife died in childbirth. The second fell from a horse, at least, that's what he claims. The third—" Jackson hesitated. "The third left in the middle of the night about a year ago. No one's seen her since." "Are you suggesting he—" Cassandra couldn't finish the thought. "I'm not suggesting anything," Jackson said carefully. Just telling you what folks around here know. Oakwood's wealthy, keeps to himself mostly. Has a reputation for being hard on his workers and harder on his livestock. Cassandra's mind raced. The photograph Thomas had sent showed a man perhaps in his early 40s, handsome in a stern way, with a full head of dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His letters had been courteous, even charming at times, describing his successful ranch and his desire for a refined Eastern wife to share his prosperity. Why would he lie, she whispered, more to herself than to Jackson. Men lie for all sorts of reasons, Miss Blackwood. Especially when they're trying to convince a young woman to travel thousands of miles to marry them. The food she'd eaten suddenly felt like lead in her stomach. I have nowhere else to go, she admitted, hating the tremor in her voice. My family home was sold to pay my father's debts. I used the last of my savings for this journey. Jackson settled beside her on the rock, keeping a respectful distance. You have options, he said quietly. Silver Creek's growing. They need teachers, seamstresses. Martha's been saying for months she could use help at the ranch. You don't have to marry a man you're afraid of. I'm not afraid, Cassandra insisted, though the lie was evident even to her own ears. I made a commitment. To a man who lied to you from the start, Jackson countered. He sighed, softening his tone. Look, I'm not trying to tell you what to do, but at least go into this with your eyes open. They resumed their journey in tense silence. The easy camaraderie of the morning evaporated. Cassandra's mind whirled with conflicting thoughts. Could she really back out now after coming all this way? What would become of her if she did? As the afternoon wore on, the landscape began to change. The lush valleys gave way to drier terrain, the vegetation sparser. When they crested a hill, Jackson pulled the wagon to a stop. Oakwood Ranch, he said simply, pointing to the sprawling property below. It was impressive, far larger than Whispering Pines, with extensive corrals, a massive barn, and a 2-story main house that would have looked at home in a prosperous eastern town. Everything about it spoke of wealth and power. Yet something about the place felt cold, unwelcoming. It's grand, Cassandra managed. Jackson made a non-committal sound and flicked the reins to start the horses moving again. As they approached the ranch, Cassandra could see men working in the corrals, their movements almost mechanical. No one called out greetings or paused to look up as the wagon passed. They pulled up in front of the main house, and Jackson helped Cassandra down, his touch brief but steady. Before they could reach the porch, the front door swung open. The man who emerged was tall and broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed in a fine suit that seemed out of place on a ranch. His hair and beard were silver gray, not dark as in the photograph, and deep lines etched his face. He had to be at least 65. Miss Blackwood, I presume? His voice was cultured, with the hint of a southern accent. I was beginning to think you'd changed your mind. Cassandra curtsied automatically, years of social training taking over. Mr. Oakwood. The stagecoach delivered me to the wrong ranch yesterday. Mr. Winters was kind enough to bring me here today. Thomas Oakwood's gaze shifted to Jackson, and the warmth in his expression cooled noticeably. Winters. Didn't expect to see you on my property. Just doing a good deed, Oakwood, Jackson replied evenly. Miss Blackwood was stranded at my place during the storm. A muscle twitched in Oakwood's jaw.
How?
Fortunate for her. He turned back to Cassandra, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Well, you're here now. Come inside, my dear. You must be exhausted from your ordeal. Before she could respond, he snapped his fingers at a ranch hand. You, boy, bring the lady's trunk inside. The young man jumped to obey, and Cassandra noted the fear in his eyes. She glanced back at Jackson, who was watching the interaction with a stony expression. I should be going, Jackson said, settling his hat more firmly on his head. Got business to attend to. Of course you do, Oakwood replied dismissively. He placed a proprietary hand on Cassandra's elbow. Come, my dear. Mrs. Harding, my housekeeper, has prepared refreshments. Cassandra allowed herself to be guided toward the door, but at the last moment, she turned back. Thank you, Mr. Winters, for everything. Jackson tipped his hat, his eyes conveying something words couldn't. Remember what I said, Miss Blackwood. You have options. Then he was climbing back onto the wagon, and Cassandra was being ushered into the grand house that suddenly felt more like a prison than a home. The interior of Oakwood Ranch was lavishly furnished with imported pieces that must have cost a fortune to transport to the territory. Everything gleamed with polish, but there was a sterility to the perfection, as if no one actually lived among these possessions. Your photograph didn't do you justice, my dear, Thomas said, his eyes traveling over her in a way that made her skin crawl. You're even lovelier than I imagined. Thank you, Cassandra murmured, removing her gloves. Though I must say you look different from your photograph as well. A flash of something anger? Guilt? Crossed his features before his smile returned. Ah, that old thing. Taken some years ago, I'm afraid. I hope you're not too disappointed. Before she could respond, a thin, severe-looking woman entered the room. The refreshments are ready, Mr. Oakwood. Thank you, Mrs. Harding. This is Miss Blackwood, my fiancé. The housekeeper's eyes narrowed slightly as she assessed Cassandra. Welcome to Oakwood Ranch, miss. I've prepared the blue guest room for you until the wedding. That's very kind of you, Cassandra replied, trying to maintain her composure despite the mounting dread in her stomach. When exactly were you planning the wedding, Mr. Oakwood? Thomas, please, he corrected smoothly. And I see no reason to wait. The pastor can come day after tomorrow. I've already arranged it. So soon? Cassandra couldn't keep the alarm from her voice. Shouldn't we take some time to become acquainted first? Thomas's smile tightened. We've been corresponding for 6 months, my dear. Besides, you've come all this way to be my wife. Why delay the inevitable? There was something in his tone, a cold certainty that sent a chill down Cassandra's spine. This man was used to getting his way, and he clearly had no intention of allowing her time to reconsider. Over tea and cakes that she could barely touch, Thomas outlined his expectations. She would manage the household, entertain on the rare occasions he had business associates visit, and provide him with sons to inherit the ranch. He spoke as if reciting terms of a business agreement rather than describing a marriage. I understand you were educated at a fine Boston school, he said, refilling his teacup. Good. I won't have to waste money on tutors for my sons. You seem very certain there will be sons, Cassandra observed, trying to keep her tone light. His eyes hardened momentarily. There will be. My second wife gave me a daughter. Useless girl. She's at a boarding school back east where she belongs. You have a daughter? This was the first Cassandra had heard of any children. Clarissa. 15 now. You needn't concern yourself with her. She'll be married off soon enough. He waved a hand dismissively. Now, about the wedding. Mrs. Harding will help you prepare. I've ordered a dress from Denver. It should arrive tomorrow. Cassandra set down her teacup with shaking hands. Mr. Oakwood, Thomas, this is all moving rather quickly. Perhaps we could postpone the wedding for a week or two, to give me time to settle in and learn my duties. His face darkened. I've waited long enough for a new wife, Cassandra. I won't wait any longer. He reached across the table to grasp her hand, his grip uncomfortably tight. You signed a contract. I paid for your journey. The arrangement will be honored. As darkness fell, Cassandra sat alone in the blue guest room, staring out the window at the distant mountains. The house was quiet, oppressively so. No friendly chatter like at Whispering Pines, no warmth or laughter. Just silence and the occasional creak of floorboards as Mrs. Harding moved about downstairs. Cassandra had unpacked her meager belongings, arranging them carefully in the ornate dresser. The room was beautiful, like everything in this house, but cold. Even the fire burning in the small hearth couldn't dispel the chill that seemed to emanate from the very walls. A soft knock at the door startled her. Mrs. Harding entered without waiting for a response, carrying a tray with a covered plate. "You missed dinner," the housekeeper said, her tone disapproving. "Mr. Oakwood doesn't appreciate tardiness at meals." "I apologize. I lost track of time," Cassandra replied, though in truth, she had been avoiding another uncomfortable interaction with her fiancé. Mrs. Harding set the tray down with unnecessary force. "You should know, miss, that Mr. Oakwood runs this house with precision. He expects compliance with his rules." Cassandra straightened her spine. "I'm sure Mr. Oakwood and I will adjust to each other's habits once we're married." A strange expression crossed the housekeeper's face. Was it pity? Yes, well, adjusting is one way to put it. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Sleep well, Miss Blackwood. Tomorrow will be busy." After the door closed, Cassandra picked at the food without interest. Thomas had mentioned during tea that he'd be gone most of the day tomorrow, handling business in Silver Creek. The thought of having the house to herself, even for a few hours, was a relief. As she prepared for bed, she found herself thinking of Jackson Winters. The contrast between him and Thomas Oakwood couldn't be more stark. Where Thomas was cold and controlling, Jackson had been straightforward and kind. She remembered his words, "You have options." But did she really? With no money and no connections in this territory, what options did she truly have? Sleep eluded her, and when dawn finally broke, Cassandra was already dressed and standing at the window, watching as Thomas rode away on a magnificent black stallion. The moment he disappeared from view, some of the tension left her body. Mrs. Harding was nowhere to be found when Cassandra ventured downstairs. Taking advantage of the solitude, she began to explore the house. Despite its grandeur, it felt unlived in, like a museum rather than a home. There were no personal touches, no photographs or mementos. In what appeared to be Thomas's study, she found a locked drawer in his desk. Curiosity overwhelming her sense of propriety, she searched the room and found a key hidden behind a book on the shelf. The drawer contained several documents, property deeds, bank statements showing considerable wealth, and at the bottom, 3 marriage certificates. With trembling hands, she examined them. Thomas had indeed been married 3 times. His first wife, Elizabeth, had died in 1860, aged just 20. The second, Margaret, in 1868, at 23. The third, Josephine, had no death certificate, but her marriage to Thomas was dated 1872. Continuing her search, Cassandra found a newspaper clipping about the tragic accident that claimed Margaret Oakwood's life. She had allegedly fallen from her horse into a ravine, her neck broken. The article mentioned that no witnesses had seen the accident. A sound from the hallway made Cassandra hastily replace the documents and lock the drawer. She barely had time to move away from the desk before Mrs. Harding appeared in the doorway. "What are you doing in Mr. Oakwood's private study?" the housekeeper demanded, her voice sharp. "I was just exploring the house," Cassandra replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I thought I should familiarize myself with my future home." Mrs. Harding's eyes narrowed. "This room is off limits unless Mr. Oakwood invites you in. Come now, your wedding dress has arrived." The dress was beautiful ivory silk with delicate lace trim, clearly expensive. As Mrs. Harding helped her try it on, Cassandra caught the older woman studying her reflection in the mirror. "It fits perfectly," Mrs. Harding remarked. "Just like the others." "The others?" Cassandra couldn't help asking. The housekeeper's mouth tightened. "The other dresses. For the other wives." She pinned a section of the bodice. "You look like her, you know. Josephine. Same coloring, same build. He has a type." A chill ran down Cassandra's spine. What happened to her? To Josephine? Mrs. Harding's hand stilled. She ran. Middle of the night, took nothing but the clothes on her back. Mr. Oakwood was displeased. Did he go after her? Of course. Spent weeks searching. Never found a trace. The housekeeper's voice dropped to a whisper. Some say she made it to California. Others say she never made it off Oakwood land. What do you believe? Cassandra asked, her heart pounding. Mrs. Harding met her eyes in the mirror. I believe you should be very careful, Miss Blackwood. Very careful indeed. The sound of horses outside drew their attention. Moving to the window, Cassandra saw Thomas returning, accompanied by several men, including one in clerical clothing. Her stomach dropped. Is that the pastor? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Yes. Mr. Oakwood decided to move the wedding to tomorrow morning. Mrs. Harding began helping her out of the dress. He's not a patient man. That evening, dinner was a tense affair. Thomas dominated the conversation, speaking at length about his plans to expand the ranch, the cattle he was breeding, the political connections he cultivated. He barely seemed to notice Cassandra's silence, content to have an audience for his monologue. Pastor Wilson will arrive at 9 tomorrow, he announced as they finished dessert. I expect you to be ready by 8:30. Mrs. Harding will help you dress. Thomas, Cassandra began carefully, I wonder if we might postpone the wedding just a little longer. I'd like more time, he interrupted, his tone dangerously soft. I've given you time, Cassandra. I've been more than generous. He leaned forward, his eyes cold. The wedding will proceed as planned. I suggest you reconcile yourself to that fact. She retreated to her room immediately after dinner, locking the door behind her. Panic clawed at her throat as she paced the floor. The evidence she'd found, combined with Mrs. Harding's warnings and Thomas's controlling behavior, painted a frightening picture. She couldn't marry this man. But what could she do? The ranch was isolated, the nearest town miles away. Even if she could reach Silver Creek, she had no money, no connections, nowhere to go. Except Whispering Pines. Jackson's words echoed in her mind. You have options. A plan began to form. Risky, perhaps even foolhardy, but better than the alternative. She would need to act tonight, under cover of darkness, before Thomas could bind her to him legally. Cassandra waited until the house fell silent, counting the hours as they ticked by. At 2 a.m, she changed into her simplest dress and sturdiest boots. She packed only what she could carry in a small satchel, a change of clothes, her mother's locket, the last of her money. Everything else would have to be left behind. Moving silently through the darkened house, she made her way to the kitchen and packed some bread and cheese. Then, heart pounding, she slipped out the back door into the cool night air. The moon was nearly full, providing enough light to see by. Cassandra kept to the shadows as she crept toward the stables. She had little experience with horses, but she'd need one if she had any hope of reaching Whispering Pines before Thomas discovered her absence. The stable was mercifully unlocked. Inside, several horses shifted and nickered softly as she entered. Cassandra approached a gentle-looking mare, speaking softly to avoid startling the animal. Going somewhere, Miss Blackwood? The voice from the shadows nearly stopped her heart. Thomas stepped into a shaft of moonlight, his expression murderous. In his hand was a riding crop, which he slapped rhythmically against his palm. You disappoint me, he continued, advancing slowly. Just like Josephine. Just like Margaret when she threatened to leave. Cassandra backed away, bumping into a stall door. They didn't die by accident, did they? She whispered. A cold smile spread across his face. Accidents happen all the time out here. Horses throw their riders. People fall downstairs. It's a dangerous territory. You won't get away with it, Cassandra said, trying to keep her voice steady. People will ask questions. Will they? No one asked about Margaret. Or Elizabeth. He was closer now, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. And no one will ask about you either, my dear. Not once you're my wife. Cassandra's hand closed around a pitchfork leaning against the wall. I will never be your wife. Thomas lunged forward, but Cassandra was quicker. She swung the pitchfork, not to injure, but to create space between them. He stumbled back, surprise giving way to rage. You little, he didn't finish the sentence, charging forward again. This time, Cassandra wasn't fast enough. The riding crop caught her across the shoulder, a line of fire that made her cry out. She dropped the pitchfork, and Thomas seized her arm, twisting painfully. I'm going to enjoy breaking you, he hissed. The sound of a pistol being cocked froze them both. Let her go, Oakwood. Jackson Winters stood in the stable doorway, his revolver aimed steadily at Thomas's chest. This doesn't concern you, Winters, Thomas snarled, though his grip on Cassandra's arm loosened slightly. I'm making it my concern. Jackson's voice was calm, but his eyes were deadly serious. Step away from her. Now. For a moment, Cassandra thought Thomas would refuse. Then, slowly, he released her arm and took a step back, his face contorted with hatred. Miss Blackwood is my fiancé. She's on my property. You have no right, she's not marrying you, Jackson interrupted. And we both know why your other wives disappeared. He gestured to Cassandra with his free hand. Come here. She didn't hesitate, moving quickly to Jackson's side, rubbing her bruised arm. You can't prove anything, Thomas spat. No one will believe your accusations. Maybe not, Jackson conceded. But folks will sure be interested to hear what Miss Blackwood has to say about your true age and how you lured her out here under false pretenses. And I reckon the sheriff might be mighty curious about those unmarked graves on your north property. Thomas's face drained of color. You're bluffing. Am I? Jackson's expression was grim. You've gotten away with too much for too long, Oakwood. It ends tonight. He turned slightly to Cassandra, keeping his gun trained on Thomas. My horse is outside. Can you ride? Not well, she admitted. You'll ride with me then. He backed toward the door, pulling her gently with him. Oakwood, you're going to stay right where you are for the next 5 minutes. After that, I don't care what you do, but if you come after Miss Blackwood, you'll answer to me. Understood. Thomas's only response was a murderous glare. Outside, Jackson helped Cassandra onto his horse before swinging up behind her. With a flick of the reins, they were galloping away from Oakwood Ranch, the night air cool against Cassandra's flushed face. How did you know? She asked once they were safely away, her voice nearly carried off by the wind. Jackson's arm tightened around her waist. I didn't, but something didn't feel right, leaving you there. I came back to make sure you were all right. He paused. Good thing I did. They rode in silence for a while, the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves the only sound. Cassandra gradually relaxed against Jackson's chest, the adrenaline of her escape giving way to exhaustion. Where are we going? She finally asked. Whispering Pines, he replied, his breath warm against her ear. Unless you'd rather go somewhere else? Cassandra shook her head. No. Whispering Pines sounds perfect. Dawn was breaking when they arrived at the ranch. Martha rushed out to meet them, her face lined with worry. Thank the Lord, she exclaimed, helping Cassandra down from the horse. When Jackson rode out in the middle of the night, I feared the worst. Miss Blackwood had a change of heart about her marriage prospects, Jackson explained, dismounting. Oakwood didn't take it well. Martha's eyes widened at the bruise forming on Cassandra's arm. That monster, she muttered. Come inside, dear. Let's get you cleaned up and fed. The kitchen at Whispering Pines was warm and welcoming, so different from the cold sterility of Oakwood Ranch. Cassandra sank gratefully into a chair while Martha bustled about, preparing breakfast and tut-tutting over her injuries. Jackson disappeared to tend to his horse, returning just as Martha was setting plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits on the table. Despite her exhaustion, Cassandra found she was ravenous. What happens now? She asked between bites. Jackson poured coffee for all of them. That depends on you. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need. I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition, Martha interrupted firmly. This house could use a woman's touch, and I'm not getting any younger. Besides, Jackson's been saying for months he needs help with the books. You can read and write, can't you? Of course, Cassandra replied. I was educated at Miss Porter's school in Connecticut. Well then, Martha said with a satisfied nod. Seems to me we've got a position ready-made for you. Jackson studied Cassandra over the rim of his coffee cup. Only if that's what you want. Silver Creek's growing. There'd be other opportunities there if you'd prefer town life. Cassandra looked around the simple but homey kitchen, then at the two people who had shown her more kindness in 2 days than she'd known in months. The decision wasn't difficult. I'd like to stay, she said softly. If you're sure. The smile that spread across Jackson's face was like sunrise after a long night. I'm sure. Over the following weeks, Cassandra settled into life at Whispering Pines. True to Martha's word, Jackson needed help with the ranch accounts, and Cassandra's education proved invaluable. She discovered she had a talent for organization that extended beyond bookkeeping, and soon she was helping manage supplies, correspondence, and planning. Word spread quickly about what had happened at Oakwood Ranch. Thomas himself spread a story about being deceived by a fortune-hunting Eastern girl, but few believed him. Too many had wondered about his previous wives, and Cassandra's account of his deception and violence resonated with the community's sense of justice. The sheriff paid a visit to Oakwood Ranch to investigate claims about unmarked graves, but found nothing conclusive. Still, Thomas's reputation was irreparably damaged. Many of his business associates distanced themselves, and he became even more reclusive. As spring turned to summer, Cassandra found herself thriving in her new life. She learned to ride properly, helped with the garden, and even assisted during calving season. Each day brought new challenges and new joys. And each day, she found herself growing closer to Jackson. He was nothing like the gentleman she'd known in Boston, nor like Thomas Oakwood. He was honest to a fault, hard-working, and possessed a quiet strength that she came to rely on. They often worked side by side during the day and sat together on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. They talked about everything her life in Boston, his dreams for the ranch, books they'd read, places they hoped to see. One evening in late July, as they sat in comfortable silence watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk, Jackson turned to her. "Cassandra," he began, then paused, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "Yes?" she prompted, heart quickening at the intensity in his eyes. "I'm not good with words like this," he admitted, "but I need to say something before I lose my nerve." Cassandra set aside her sewing. "You can tell me anything, Jackson. You know that." He took a deep breath. "That first day, when the stagecoach delivered you to the wrong ranch, I told you maybe God sent you here. I didn't know then how right I was." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "These past months, having you here, it's like the ranch finally became a home. You filled spaces I didn't even know were empty." Tears pricked at Cassandra's eyes as he continued. "I'm not a wealthy man like Oakwood. I can't offer you fancy dresses or imported furniture. But I can promise to work every day to make you happy, to build a life with you, if that's what you want." "Jackson," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Are you asking me to marry you?" He nodded, a vulnerability in his expression she'd never seen before. "I love you, Cassandra. I think I've loved you since that first evening by the fire." "I know it hasn't been that long, and maybe it's too soon," but she silenced him with a finger to his lips. "It's not too soon. Not when it's right." She moved her hand to cup his cheek. "I love you too. And yes, I'll marry you." The joy that bloomed on his face was something Cassandra knew she would remember for the rest of her life. He pulled her close, his kiss tender at first, then deepening with a passion that left her breathless. When they finally parted, He rested his forehead against hers. "I promise you won't regret this." "I know," she said simply. "Some mistakes turn out to be the best things that ever happened to us. Being delivered to the wrong ranch was the most fortunate error of my life." They were married in September, with the aspens turning gold on the mountainsides. The ceremony was held at Whispering Pines, attended by neighbors and friends from Silver Creek. Martha cried throughout, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief and declaring it was about time that boy found himself a good woman. Cassandra wore a simple dress of cream-colored silk, carrying wildflowers gathered that morning. When Jackson saw her walking toward him, the look of wonder on his face made her feel more beautiful than any fancy gown ever could. Their vows were straightforward and heartfelt, promises to love, honor, and cherish spoken under the vast Colorado sky. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Jackson's kiss held both tenderness and promise, sealing their bond before God and their community. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with food, music, and dancing in the yard. As twilight descended, Jackson led Cassandra away from the festivities to a quiet spot overlooking the valley. "Happy, Mrs. Winters?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist from behind. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, leaning back against his chest. "It's strange to think that if the stagecoach had delivered me to the right place, we might never have met." Jackson pressed a kiss to her temple. "I don't believe that. Some things are meant to be, one way or another." "Like us?" She turned in his arms to face him. "Exactly like us." His smile was tender as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I think we would have found each other somehow. But I'm glad it happened the way it did." "Even with all the drama?" she teased. "Even with that." His expression grew serious. "Cassandra, I want you to know something. I don't just love you for what you bring to the ranch or how you've helped me. I love you for who you are, your strength, your kindness, your spirit. You're not just my wife. You're my partner in everything." Tears welled in her eyes at his words. In Boston, women of her social circle were valued primarily as ornaments and mothers. Never had she imagined finding a man who would see her as an equal, who would value her mind as much as her heart. "Thank you," she whispered, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. "For seeing me, really seeing me." They returned to the celebration hand in hand, joining in one last dance before bidding their guests goodbye. And later, when they were finally alone, they discovered another kind of partnership, finding in each other's arms a passion and tenderness that sealed their bond in the most intimate way. Life at Whispering Pines settled into a rhythm as autumn gave way to winter. The ranch prospered under their joint management, with Cassandra's Eastern education complementing Jackson's practical experience. They made decisions together, faced challenges together, celebrated successes together. News reached them occasionally of Thomas Oakwood. His business dealings continued to suffer, and rumors persisted about his previous wives. No one in the territory would consider marrying him now, and his daughter, upon reaching adulthood, refused to return from the east to see him. Cassandra felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only relief that she had escaped his fate and gratitude for the life she had found instead. When spring arrived, bringing with it new calves and fresh green shoots in the garden, Cassandra discovered she was expecting their first child. Jackson's response to the news was everything she could have hoped for: joy, tenderness, and a fierce protectiveness that made her feel cherished beyond measure. "A baby," he kept saying, his hand gentle on her still, flat stomach. "Our baby." Martha was ecstatic, immediately beginning to knit tiny garments and planning alterations to the small bedroom adjacent to theirs. The entire ranch seemed to glow with anticipation as summer approached. The baby, a boy they named James after Jackson's father, arrived in the crisp autumn of 1876, with golden leaves drifting past the bedroom window and the first snow dusting the distant peaks. He had Jackson's dark hair and Cassandra's blue eyes, a perfect blend of them both. Holding him in her arms, with Jackson beside her looking both terrified and awestruck, Cassandra felt a completeness she hadn't known was possible. This was family, not the rigid social structure she'd known in Boston, but something organic and vital, built on love rather than obligation. "He's perfect," Jackson whispered, one finger trapped in his son's tiny fist. "Just like his mother." "I was thinking he looks like you," Cassandra replied with a tired smile. "Poor child." Jackson laughed, the sound full of joy. "He's the luckiest child in the territory, having you for his mother." As James grew, so did Whispering Pines. Jackson's innovative ranching methods drew attention, and neighboring ranchers began adopting his techniques. Cassandra started a small school for the children of ranch hands and nearby homesteaders, using her education to ensure the next generation would have opportunities their parent hadn't. Their family expanded too. A daughter, Elizabeth, joined them 2 years after James, followed by twins, Sarah and Samuel, 3 years later. Their home, once so quiet, now rang with children's laughter and occasional squabbles, with bedtime stories and morning chaos. 10 years after that fateful day, when the stagecoach delivered Cassandra to the wrong ranch, Whispering Pines hosted a celebration. Friends and neighbors gathered to mark the decade that had transformed a struggling ranch into one of the most successful in the territory, and to celebrate the family that had grown there. As twilight fell, Jackson found Cassandra sitting on their porch swing, watching their children play a game of tag with the other ranch children. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, settling beside her. She smiled, leaning into his embrace. "I was just thinking about how differently my life could have turned out. How close I came to a very different fate." Jackson's arm tightened around her. "I still get cold thinking about it. About what might have happened if I hadn't gone back that night." "But you did," she reminded him, placing her hand over his heart. "You followed your instincts. Your goodness." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as James, now 9, and the spitting image of his father, helped little Sarah up after a tumble. "Do you ever regret it?" Jackson asked suddenly. "Coming west? Leaving behind the comforts of Boston?" Cassandra turned to face him, taking in the face she knew better than her own, the laugh lines around his eyes, the touch of silver at his temples, the warmth in his gaze that had never dimmed. "Not for a single moment," she said with absolute certainty. "This is where I belong. With you, with our children, with this life we've built together." He kissed her then, a kiss that held a decade of shared joys and sorrows, of passion that had matured but never faded, of a love that had grown deeper with each passing year. "When that stagecoach brought you to my door," he murmured against her lips, "I told you maybe God sent you here. Now I know for sure he did." Cassandra smiled, her heart full to bursting. The wrong ranch turned out to be exactly the right place after all. As darkness settled over Whispering Pines and stars began to speckle the vast Colorado sky, the Winters family gathered their children and their friends for a bonfire. Sitting beside her husband, with their youngest daughter drowsing in her lap and their sons and eldest daughter roasting apples in the fire's edge, Cassandra felt a contentment so complete it brought tears to her eyes. This was home not because of where it was, but because of who she shared it with. A man who loved her for her mind as well as her heart. Children who grew strong and kind under the big sky. A community that had embraced her as one of their own. All because a tired stagecoach driver had delivered her to the wrong ranch, and a good man had whispered, "Maybe God sent you here." Sometimes, she reflected as Jackson caught her eye across the fire and smiled that smile that still made her heart race. The greatest blessings come disguised as mistakes. And sometimes, finding where you truly belong means getting thoroughly, wonderfully lost first.